I never thought I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life takes such unexpected turns that you need to get it all out, if only to make sense of it yourself. My name is Melissa, and at 35, I've experienced more joy and pain than I ever thought possible. The world I once knew has crumbled around me, leaving me to pick up the pieces and try to understand where everything went so terribly wrong. Let me start from the beginning. A year ago, I finalized my divorce from Richard, my ex-husband. Despite what you might think, we managed to keep things civil. Richard was, still is, a wealthy man, and he was generous in the settlement. He left me our large suburban house where I live with our son, Tommy, and an apartment in the city that provides steady rental income. The house is beautiful, with a sprawling backyard where Tommy loved to play, and the apartment is in a prime location that ensures I'll never have to worry about finding tenants. Mommy, when is Daddy coming to visit? Tommy would ask me almost every day, his big blue eyes full of hope and innocence. He was 6, and despite the divorce, Richard remained a constant presence in his life. This weekend, sweetheart. Remember? He promised to take you to the park, I'd reply, grateful that at least this part of our broken family still worked. Richard would come by every Saturday morning, his expensive car pulling into our driveway at exactly 9 a.m., never late. You're doing a great job with him, Mel, Richard told me one day after dropping Tommy off. I know this isn't easy, but you're handling it better than anyone could. My own family situation was complicated. My parents divorced when I was 3, and my mother remarried pretty quickly. I still remember the confusion of suddenly having a new man in the house, calling himself my dad. A year later, she had Jessica, my half-sister. Growing up, Jessica and I were never close, we maintained what I'd call a politely distant relationship. Different fathers, different personalities, different lives. Why don't you and Aunt Jessica ever hang out like other sisters? Tommy once asked me innocently during dinner, his fork pushing around the peas he was trying to avoid eating. I remember pausing before answering, sometimes sisters are just different, honey. But that's okay. Just like how you don't always want to play with every kid in your class. But she never comes to my birthday parties, he pointed out, finally putting a spoonful of peas in his mouth. Aunt Jessica is very busy with her own life, I explained, though the truth was more complicated. Jessica had always seemed to resent our family dynamics, especially after my father continued to support me financially through college, while her own father struggled to make ends meet. If only I'd known then how those differences would tear our family apart. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs, the subtle eye rolls when I mentioned my new car, the backhanded compliments about my lucky marriage to Richard, the way she'd suddenly become busy whenever I invited her to family gatherings at our house. Your sister's just jealous, my friend Sarah used to tell me. Some people can't handle seeing others succeed. I'd always brush off such comments, telling myself that family was family, and that someday we'd find a way to bridge the gap between us. How naive I was. Everything changed when my grandmother, my father's mother, passed away. She was a simple woman who lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where window boxes overflow with geraniums and the screen door creaks in exactly the same way it did 30 years ago. The funeral was small but dignified, just like she would have wanted. What I didn't expect was that she'd left everything to me in her will, the house, and all her savings. I hadn't even known she had savings. Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you, my father told me at the funeral, his eyes red-rimmed as we stood in the cemetery. She loved how you'd visit her every Sunday with Tommy, even after the divorce. She used to tell me, that girl has a good heart, just like her daddy. I just wish Tommy could have had more time with her, I replied, watching my son place a small bouquet of daisies on her grave. He'd picked them himself from our garden that morning. Mommy, is great-grandma in heaven now? Tommy asked, his small hand slipping into mine. Yes, sweetheart, and I bet she's already baking her famous chocolate chip cookies up there. I was still processing this inheritance when my parents called me over to their house for what they called an important family discussion. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. The house smelled of my mother's signature pot roast, but the familiar comfort of home was overshadowed by an unmistakable atmosphere of confrontation. My mother sat me down at their kitchen table, the same one where we'd had countless family dinners. The scratches from Jessica's teenage years were still visible in the wood, permanent reminders of family history. "Would you like some coffee?" my mother asked, already pouring me a cup in the mug she knew was my favorite. "We need to talk about your grandmother's house," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to be wary of since childhood. "What about it?" I asked, already feeling defensive. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, bracing myself. "Well," my stepfather chimed in, leaning forward in his chair that creaked under his weight, "you have to admit you've got quite a bit of property now. The house from Richard, the rental apartment, and now this." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. I watched as my mother nodded along, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her own coffee cup in a rhythm that set my teeth on edge. "Jessica's been struggling, you know," my mother continued, her voice taking on that persuasive tone she'd perfected over the years. "She's been renting that tiny apartment for years. It's barely bigger than a closet, really. And with her salary at the city administration, well, you know how government jobs pay." I sat silently, watching steam rise from my untouched coffee. "We thought, well, wouldn't it be fair if you gave her grandmother's house?" My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "After all, you've been so blessed, Melissa. And Jessica, she's had it rough." "After all," my stepfather added with what he probably thought was a persuasive smile, "it's not like it's a particularly valuable property. You wouldn't really be losing much. And think how much it would mean to your sister." I sat there, stunned by their audacity, but also feeling a familiar guilt creep in. It was true, I did have more than Jessica. And the house wasn't particularly valuable. The weight of their expectations pressed down on me like a physical force. "Have you discussed this with Jessica?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the way they exchanged glances. "Well, we wanted to talk to you first," my mother said quickly. "But she's been having such a hard time lately. You know she broke up with that boyfriend of hers? The one from the bank?" I hadn't known. I realized with a start that I knew very little about my sister's life these days. When was the last time we'd had a real conversation? Christmas, maybe? And even then, it had been mostly small talk about the weather and Jessica's complaints about her job. What my parents didn't know was that Tommy's health had been deteriorating lately. The signs were subtle at first: unexplained bruises, frequent fatigue, a pallor that no amount of time in the sunlight seemed to cure. He'd been sick since birth, but doctors struggled to diagnose him properly. They kept saying he was just a delicate child, that some kids take longer to build up their immune systems. But Mother's intuition told me something was seriously wrong. It wasn't until he turned 4 that we got the devastating news: blood cancer. I remember sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, the walls covered with cheerful children's drawings that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. "The tests are conclusive," Dr. Martinez said gently, sliding the results across her desk. "It's acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to start treatment immediately." I clutched Tommy's small hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are his chances?" "Every case is different," she hedged, but her eyes told me more than her words. "We're seeing some concerning patterns in his latest tests. The treatment isn't working as well as we'd hoped." The next months became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and nights spent sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside Tommy's bed. Richard, despite our divorce, was there every step of the way. "Whatever he needs, whatever it costs," he'd say, his usual businesslike demeanor cracking whenever Tommy's illness was discussed. "I'll make sure he gets the best treatment available." I was stretched thin between hospital visits, work, and now this family pressure about the house. Maybe that's why I gave in so easily when my parents suggested giving the house to Jessica. The decision seemed so insignificant compared to watching my son fight for his life. I handed over the keys to her one afternoon, between Tommy's treatments. "I'll transfer the paperwork once things settle down with Tommy's treatment," I told her, my mind already on the next doctor's appointment. "Oh my God, thank you," Jessica had squealed, hugging me for the first time in years. Her perfume was overwhelming, making me slightly nauseous. "I'm going to throw the best housewarming party ever in a month. You'll come, right? And Tommy too, if he's feeling up to it?" I barely registered her excitement. My mind was on Tommy's latest test results, on the way his small face had grown increasingly pale, on how he'd stopped asking to go to the park or play with his favorite toys. "Mommy," he'd asked me one night in the hospital, his voice barely a whisper, "am I going to get better?" "Of course you are, sweetheart," I lied, stroking his thin hair. "You're the bravest boy I know." For a brief moment, there was hope. Tommy seemed to be responding to the new treatment protocol. His color improved, he started eating more, even asked to play with his toys again. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. "Mommy, can we go to the park this weekend?" he asked one morning, and my heart soared. It was the first time in months he'd shown interest in going outside. "As soon as you're strong enough, baby," I promised. "We'll go to the park and feed the ducks, just like we used to." "Can we invite Daddy too?" "Of course we can." But a week later, everything crashed. The call from the hospital came at 3 a.m., jolting me from a fitful sleep. Tommy had been admitted the day before with a high fever, but the doctors had assured me it was just a minor setback. "Mrs. Peterson? You need to come to the hospital immediately. Tommy's condition has deteriorated significantly." The nurse's voice was professional but gentle, setting off every alarm bell in my head. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. Everything was a blur of streetlights and rain-slicked roads. I ran 3 red lights, but I didn't care. All I could think about was reaching my son. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The doctors were already working on him, but I could see in their faces that they were fighting a losing battle. The next few hours were a nightmare of medical terms, desperate measures, and finally, devastatingly, silence. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peterson. We did everything we could." Dr. Martinez's voice cracked as she delivered the news. His system was just too weak to fight anymore. I sat by his bed for hours afterward, holding his small, cold hand, unable to process that my beautiful, brave little boy was gone. The sun was rising when Richard arrived, his face ashen. "Mel," he whispered, pulling me into his arms, "oh God, Mel." Through my fog of grief, I managed to text Jessica, "Tommy died. Funeral in 3 days." Her response came 5 minutes later, "Okay." Just that, one word, lowercase, no emotion, no condolences, no acknowledgement that her nephew, a child she'd known since birth, had just died. When I called my mother an hour later, her response was even more shocking. I had to steady myself against the wall as I dialed, needing to hear my mother's voice, needing the comfort only a mother could provide. "Oh yes, Jessica told us," she said, her voice distant and distracted. "Listen, honey, about the funeral, we won't be able to make it. We have other commitments that day." "Other commitments?" I repeated, convinced I must have misheard. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Yes, Jessica's housewarming party is that day, and I promised to help her prepare. You understand, don't you? These things are so much work, and we've already invited everyone. It would be such a hassle to reschedule." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Mom, this is Tommy's funeral we're talking about. Your grandson's funeral." "I know, dear, and it's very sad. But life goes on, doesn't it? Jessica's been planning this party for weeks. We can't disappoint all her guests." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. The world had stopped making sense the moment Tommy's heart stopped beating, but this was beyond comprehension. How could my own mother choose a housewarming party over her grandson's funeral? My hands shook as I dialed Jessica's number. "What the hell are you thinking?" I demanded as soon as she picked up. The phone nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. "Why are you having your party on the day of Tommy's funeral?" "Because that's the day I want to have it," she replied, her voice cold and matter of fact. I could hear music playing in the background, the sound of her walking around what was supposed to be her new home. I've been planning this. All the invitations are sent out. Jessica, this is my son's funeral we're talking about. My son, your nephew. The little boy who used to make you birthday cards every year. Can't you move the party? Why should I? She snapped, and I heard something crash in the background. It's just a funeral. He's dead anyway, it doesn't matter to him when he goes in the ground. I'm alive, and I want to celebrate my new house. Do you know how long I've waited for this? The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the kitchen floor. In that moment, something inside me broke, and something else, something harder and colder, took its place. I thought about all the times Jessica had held me when I cried over Tommy's illness, all the times she'd promised to be there for me. Had it all been an act? The funeral was a blur of black clothes and whispered condolences. Richard stood beside me, a steady presence, his hand occasionally squeezing mine when the grief threatened to overwhelm me. My mother and stepfather showed up for exactly 10 minutes, looking uncomfortable in their party clothes, beneath their hastily donned black coats. We can't stay long, my mother whispered, not quite meeting my eyes. Jessica needs help setting up. I watched them leave, feeling nothing but a cold, empty space where my heart used to be. Their car hadn't even left the parking lot before I saw my mother checking her phone, probably coordinating party details with Jessica. Did you hear about Jessica's party? My cousin Sarah whispered to me during the reception. She invited half the town. None of us are going, of course. It's not right. We all told her so, but she wouldn't listen. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. The grandmother's house was still legally mine. Jessica had the keys, yes, but not the deed. Not the paperwork. Not the legal right to host anything there. At 6 o'clock sharp, when I knew Jessica's party would be in full swing, I made 2 calls. The first was to the police, reporting intruders in my grandmother's house. My voice was steady as I gave them the address, explaining that people were using my property without permission. The second call was to my lawyer, confirming that all the property documents were in order. Everything's exactly as it should be, he assured me. The house is still legally yours. No transfers have been processed. I arrived just as the police did. The music was blaring, some pop song about celebration and good times, and through the windows, I could see people dancing, drinking, laughing. Jessica was in the middle of it all, wearing a new dress, playing hostess in a house that legally belonged to me. The police officers were professional and efficient. I showed them the documents, my hand steady as I pointed out the property deed with my name clearly listed as owner. This is my property, I told them, my voice carrying across the sudden silence as the music cut off. These people are here without my permission. The chaos that ensued was beautiful to watch. Jessica's face turned from confusion to rage as her guests began leaving, not wanting to be involved in a property dispute with police present. Her carefully arranged party food sat abandoned on tables, her decorations suddenly looking cheap and tacky in the harsh reality of the moment. But she gave me this house, Jessica screamed, mascara running down her face as she pointed at me. Tell them, Mom. Tell them how she promised it to me. Our mother and stepfather tried to intervene, but without legal documents, their words meant nothing. They could only watch as Jessica's perfect party fell apart around them. Show me the paperwork, I said calmly, standing in the middle of what was supposed to be Jessica's moment of triumph. Show me where I legally transferred this house to you. When everyone else had left, Jessica exploded. Her face was contorted with a rage I'd never seen before, all pretense of sisterly affection stripped away. You stuck-up thing, she screamed, knocking over a vase of flowers. Water and petals scattered across the floor. You've always had everything. Rich husband, big house, everyone's sympathy. I hate you, I'm glad your husband left you, and I'm glad your brat is dead. The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. I looked at my mother, expecting something. Horror? Shock? Instead, she moved to stand beside Jessica, her face hard with anger. You've always been selfish, Melissa, she spat. Always thinking you're better than everyone else. Just because you married rich, just because you had a sick child everyone felt sorry for. I felt a cold clarity wash over me as I watched them. For years, I'd been supporting them financially, $1,500 every month, without fail, deposited into their account. Christmas gifts, birthday presents, surprise packages, just because. The cruise I'd paid for last year. Mom's new kitchen renovation. The car repairs for my stepfather's Mercedes. All while they consistently favored Jessica, made excuses for her behavior, enabled her worst impulses. Let me make something very clear, I said, my voice steady and cold. From this moment on, the money stops. All of it. The monthly deposits, the gifts, the random acts of generosity you've come to expect. It's done. My mother's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? You chose a housewarming party over your grandson's funeral. You're defending the person who just celebrated my child's death. Watch me. My stepfather stepped forward, his face red. Now, Melissa, let's not be hasty. We all say things we don't mean when we're upset. I mean every word, I cut him off. You won't see another penny from me, ever. Get out of my house, all of you. And don't ever contact me again. You can't do this to us, my mother's voice cracked, the reality of what she was losing finally hitting her. We're your parents. No, I replied. Parents don't do what you did. Parents don't choose a party over their grandson's funeral. Parents don't defend someone who celebrates a child's death. You're just people I used to know. This isn't over, Jessica threatened as they left, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She'd always relied on our parents, and now I'd just cut off their main source of extra income. You'll regret this. The next day, social media exploded with my mother's posts about my cruelty and Jessica's tearful comments about being homeless. But they conveniently left out the part about choosing the party over Tommy's funeral. The truth came out quickly though. Our relatives and friends knew what really happened. They'd been at the funeral, seen the party invitations, witnessed the cruel timing of it all. Who throws a party on the day of their nephew's funeral? My cousin Sarah commented publicly. And who helps prepare for that party instead of attending their grandson's funeral? Shame on all of you. The backlash was swift and merciless. Jessica's tearful posts about sisterly betrayal were met with disgust and condemnation. When someone leaked the information about how much financial support I'd been providing all these years, the comments became even more scathing. She was forced to shut down her social media accounts as people shared the story of her heartless celebration and our parents' enabling behavior. Months passed. I was starting to heal, attending weekly therapy sessions, learning to live with the Tommy-shaped hole in my heart. My therapist, Dr. Anderson, helped me work through the layers of grief, not just for Tommy, but for the family I thought I had. Then my neighbors called about vandalism at my grandmother's house. Someone's breaking all the windows, Mrs. Jenkins reported, her voice shaking. I can hear the glass shattering. Thanks to the security cameras I'd installed, a precaution that now seemed prescient, I had clear footage of Jessica smashing every window in the house. The video showed her methodically working her way around the building, her face twisted with hatred as she threw rocks through each pane. I didn't hesitate to press charges. When my mother called, begging me to reconsider, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You'll ruin her career, she wailed over the phone. She'll lose her job at the city administration. Think about her future. Like she thought about Tommy's funeral, I replied and hung up. Jessica was fired when the video went viral. The court ordered her to pay substantial fines and damages. Last I heard, she's unemployed and living with our parents, her prestigious position at the city administration just another casualty of her own hatred. Some might call it cruel, but I feel no remorse. Every time I visit Tommy's grave, I remember Jessica's words about my brat and her party on his funeral day. Some things are unforgivable. Yesterday, my therapist asked if I ever think about reconciling with my family. They're not my family anymore, I answered, looking out her office window at the spring trees beginning to bloom. Family doesn't do what they did. I'm learning to live again, one day at a time. Tommy taught me about unconditional love, the kind that persists even when your heart is shattered into a million pieces. Jessica taught me about unconditional hate, the kind that consumes everything it touches. And I've learned that sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you end up with. As I sit in my quiet house, looking at Tommy's photos, I know I made the right choice. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. And sometimes, the only way to honor the memory of those we've lost is to cut ties with those who dishonored their passing.